Hey everyone, it's been a while, but I thought it would be fun to make a video breaking down on how I make planet scenes. I've made a lot of planet scenes in the past, and they're a really kind of fun scene to do because it's really easy to bring something that looks pretty together really quickly. So yeah, when I first kind of think of planet scenes, there's usually sort of 3 different layers that I kind of think of to make the base of a planet, and these are the only ones you really need, and all the extras are sort of dependent on what kind of planet you want to make. But you have the base layer, which is essentially just the geometry, like the albedo map of the planet, and then you'll have the cloud layer. You can have multiple, but for staying basic, you'll have just one cloud layer, which is just pretty much a 2D texture that is just the clouds plugged into an alpha map that appears clouds, even though it's just like a 2D sphere. And then your VDB layer, or like you can also in Blender use a sphere and then just add a volume texture, which pretty much will just absorb all that light and act as an atmosphere. So yeah, before getting into it, I've done all of this in Houdini and V-Ray, but to be honest, all this advice you can really do in any rendering program. It's pretty universal advice in general. The base layer, pretty simple. It's just a big sphere that's subdivided a bunch of times and then added a material to it. I don't think the material is too advanced, so it's literally just an albedo texture. And because we're so zoomed in, what I like to do is tile the texture, because we won't see the tiling anyway, because we're just on one part of the sphere. So it just adds some extra detail in. Yeah, so then the cloud layers is I use this really big cloud map. So I'll just take that same sphere pretty much and scale it up a little bit larger than the albedo sphere. So pretty much the clouds are sitting on top. As you can see, I literally didn't even add like a color for this. It's just like white, left it as white. And then I've plugged in these clouds into the opacity layer. So pretty much the black part of the image will make the object transparent and the white part will be non-transparent or opaque. And yeah, that kind of creates that illusion that there's clouds going around the planet, even though it's actually just a sphere. So what I've done for this is, and I do it quite a lot as well, is I do 2 layers. So especially if I feel like there isn't enough cloud or enough cloud detail, I'll take that same cloud layer, scale it up a tiny bit again to make it sit over, and just add like another rotation to the sphere so we can get like more variation of clouds. It just gives a bit more control. And then the VDB, specifically for V-Ray and Houdini, I've had to make a VDB for this because the issue I was running into is that I was getting these voxel squares showing. So what I've done is I've taken the sphere and I've just blasted out the part, or selected out the part for that I want to use, and then I've extruded it and then polyfilled it, so it's just a complete solid object, converted it to a VDB just so I can add a VDB material to it. This is a really V-Ray specific thing. Maybe some other render engines will need that as well, but I found I needed this for V-Ray. And Blender, from my knowledge, you can just have a sphere and add a volume texture to that, and that's what I do in Blender. But yeah, pretty basic. For lighting though, most of the time it is just a sun. I'll sometimes add other lights depending on if I have like a spaceship flying by or something like that, just because you can run into an issue where one side is really dark, but then I'll usually light per pass. So I'll usually light the planet and then render out the ship separately in a different pass with different lighting setup, but still kind of following the same main light. A couple of things I do change though is size of the sun. This can just change the amount of shadow you have pretty much. So if you want a nicer roll off on your planet, you want to change the sun size. And then in V-Ray it's also called the bias, I think, which is just, it pretty much just affects your shadows and how your shadows look, if you want a harsh line or if you want a soft roll off. It's kind of an artistic choice. But yeah, that's pretty much it for Houdini. It's pretty simple. A lot of this is really just dialing in the values, and it's not really any more complicated than that. So yeah, diving into Nuke, we get something that's a bit more interesting, and this is the raw render we got from V-Ray. Pretty nice. And I also used a trick for this, which we'll get into later. So first thing I did is I used a crypto map. I graded up part of the clouds. So I had this weird cloud issue here where I was getting these black splodges. So this is just like a grade to sort of fix that. So this is where I did the atmosphere ring. So the way I did this is I essentially keyed out the bright parts of the image. So if we go into the key, I took this part and then I took a rotor shape to stencil it out. So pretty much what I'm doing here is isolating this top part here where we want it to glow. So I selected that out and then I blurred it, added glow to it, added that over so you can see the difference here, before, after. And then I also wanted even more glow and more of a roll off, just because I think my reference had that. So then I did a secondary layer of that, and then a third layer, and then also a color correct afterwards, just to take out those blues a bit. So yeah, as you can see, before, after, pretty big difference I find. Looks a lot more realistic like this, just because it imitates a camera a bit more. Don't worry about these were just different passes of me testing out stuff for the scene. Yeah, fog. So technically there isn't actually an atmosphere in space, so you wouldn't have fog, but at the same time, if it looks nice, I'll just sometimes add it. So this is pretty simple. I'm literally just taking a ramp, a constant, and merge plussing it over this. It's like adding a depth pass essentially. And then it's just some exposure adjustments from this right side. So this is just like a ramp over here. These are pretty much masks, by the way. So I'm just masking out where I want to make these color adjustments. And who correct, and then transforms it. Oh yeah, okay, so this is where we get to this part. So essentially, I had this one render, and this is a pretty heavy scene just because it's really dense VDBs. It's a lot of things going on top of each other, and it takes a while to render. It's a heavy render. So what I wanted to do, and what I do in general with stuff like this, where the planet's far away, is I'll render on overscan. So let's say this is a 2K render. I'll render 20% more resolution, and then when I'm in Nuke, crop it in, and essentially project it onto a sphere. So what happens then is if we export our camera, it'll pretty much track to it. And so we get the same kind of results that we would if we would render the image sequence, but we were just doing it a lot faster because we're only rendering one image. So the camera essentially that we've exported looks over an image where there's more bounds like around the edges. Kind of hard to explain, but that's what it is. It's just a simple way to render one frame and still sort of get animation. But keep in mind, this only really works for stuff like this because it's really far away and it's like a background image essentially. So then I added some stars, again, really subtle. But it adds to it a little bit. And then the flare, so I've just taken a flare like this. This is really low resolution, and I suggest you actually use a plugin for this. So the plugin is called Optical Flares. It's really good, but I didn't have it on this computer, so I've just done this and kind of like animated it. Really janky way to do it. This is not what you want to do, but that's how I've done it. So yeah, and then also just adding on some lens dirt and kind of putting that over top just to add that, you know, a little bit of source. And then the rest here is just color grading. So as you can see, taking the exposure down a bit just because I want a bit more contrast. Grading it to get that blue back, chromatic aberration, lens distortion, and grain. So you can see those last few bits. Just kind of dirty up the image a bit. So this looks very CG if you zoom in. Looks a bit less CG now that you have those adjustments. But yeah, that's essentially it. I kind of use the same process for most of my planet scenes. You know, all the way from the 3D part of it all the way to comp. And yeah, no, you can play around. I also just realized another part I didn't cover was the city lights, but they're the same as the clouds. We just take a image texture like that has city lights in a black background, and then you just plug it into the alpha of your material. So the black parts will be transparent, and then the bright parts will be emissive. Once you turn your emission on, and you kind of, I like to put it below my cloud layers, just so it kind of, you know, following the real world as reference. But yeah,